This is real medicine we are doing, and we're going to be teaching people about real medicine. I call it grandmother medicine, but it's not just from grandmothers, but it really is grandmother medicine is taught from the elders through to us and to our ancestors in the future. So everybody, I am so excited about this conversation that we are about to have. I am with Lakia Gooch, who has written a book called Concoctions, Oxymels, Shrubs, and Switches. And we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and Lakia is an expert in one of my favorite areas. She has written this book about this, about how to make your own medicines. So I'm super eager to get started. I'm going to begin by asking you a question. Lakia, please explain to me what oxymels and switches are. I'm familiar with shrubs. Thank you.
All right. So an oxymel, thank you for having me. Let me just digress just 1 second. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for exactly what you're doing and just, having these conversations. So to answer your question, an oxymel is an ancient medicine. It is something that was used for exactly the purpose of kind of getting the human body back into or closer to a place of homeostasis, if you will. So what it is combining vinegar and honey in equal parts, or twice as much honey as is vinegar. So for instance, when I'm making an oxymel, I'm going to combine with my vinegar, maybe a cup of vinegar, maybe a cup of honey. And then to that, I actually have some right here. So when I'm making the concoction, right, that becomes the honey, a lot of times I'll upcycle, recycle. I'll use the honey jar at the end of it. So when I'm at the end of the honey jar, I'm literally going to just use that actual jar. It's already got the rest of the honey left in it. I'll pour some vinegar in there. And then what I'll add to it is just some dry herbs. Like this is chamomile. It's one that I'm steeping right now with some orange peels, some star anise, some cloves. And it's a way to strip down all of the nutrients and all of the values, all the wonderful benefits from all of these dry and fresh herbs and spices. And then you have the ability to then, so that's the concoction. So when it's done, I decoct it, right? So I pour all the plant matter off of it and put it into these cute little jars, and I'll label it with whatever the concoction was that went in it. So I'll know what it's going to do in my body. Is this going to help my tummy? Is this going to help my hip pain? Is this going to help with my headaches? It gives me the ability to be very, very pointed and directed with what each one of these different plants, just the plants themselves, understanding their properties, and then understanding how to use them in my human self to make it do exactly what I want it to do.
Fantastic. And I'm going to interject and say there, you mentioned, does it go help your tummy, or does it help your hip, as you said? There is a property of herbs in Chinese medicine. They're called envoy herbs. And the envoy is you're visiting to go see the emperor, and we need to get you through the palace. And so if you're not familiar with the customs, you don't make a mistake and be rude by not taking your shoes off or whatever. The envoy makes you go smoothly to the right place. Licorice is an envoy herb. In many respects, ginger will help with that type of thing. I have so many questions. What type of herbs do you use? And also, you have such an interesting backstory. Why don't you fill in a little of your backstory as well?
Sure. So that's a great question, and it's a perfect segue, actually. So I'll be honest, from an herb perspective, and this is kind of part of the reason that I wrote the book Concoctions, because just like right now, I'm actually drinking something that's in my book, and I wrote it because this is legitimately just part of my everyday medical process. It's part of my treatment plan. I've incorporated this into just what I do on a daily basis. So it's become, at this point, probably almost more preventative than anything else. So backstory is, my name's Lakia A. Gooch. I am the founder of Stand for Something Media Group Limited, and we're launching the Medical Militia Patient Portal app. And the way I arrived there is I was born with muscular dystrophy, but I was not diagnosed until I was 28 years old. And that part of my life, growing up in the hospital, growing up in the healthcare system, being misdiagnosed, and really having a tough go at it in my youth, it also grew from me the want and the need and the will to then become the solution I was unable to find in the market myself.
So the doctors, you knew there was a problem, but the doctors did not diagnose it until you were 28. And so part of your process is, as much as these people may have been trying to help, they're not getting it right. I need to take care of this body myself.
Absolutely. I was fortunate. My grandmother had a huge hand in raising me. And one of the lessons, speaking of grandma medicine, right? One of the lessons that she really did a spectacular job of getting into my being is that my body is a temple. She made that very clear to me at a very, very young age. And she stressed that. And it was to the point that everything that you do to your body is important. The lotion you put on your skin, the soap you use, the ingredients that go in those things, not just what you put in your body, but yes, also what you put in your body. And truly understanding that the medicine part of treating your human self began at home. There inevitably are going to be situations and circumstances, and I work very closely with my healthcare team. They're awesome. However, there are a lot of times and places and spaces where I am able to, because of what my grandmother put into me, your body is a temple. She was a farmer. She came from farmers, on both sides of my family. So I grew up with a garden, a farm, urban farm in my backyard. I grew up understanding crops and how to plant and what's in season and what's local, and the importance of using local honey to my human self and how it helps my allergies.
Oh, yeah.
So there's all this grandma medicine, there's all these things that my grandmother kind of put into me long before anyone was able to diagnose me. My grandmother was teaching me how to manage each of the symptoms as best I could on my own. And then working with the healthcare system in conjunction for the things that were outside of my scope. But just managing my temple, and just being very intentional and mindful, that's probably the biggest piece of the puzzle.
What, if you want to share with folks, is a symptom that bothers you considerably, and how do you treat it with the botanicals and the mixtures and the oxymels that you are making?
A great question. So I was I was hoping we would have this conversation because I literally just had this situation occur. So maybe about 3 days ago, we were having a little in-home barbecue, right? So me and my partner, decided we're gonna barbecue inside, and we're primary plant-based in our diet. So it's always interesting and entertaining when we decide we're gonna barbecue. And one of my guilty pleasures, even though I have a pretty clean diet, aside from gummy bears, is kettle cooked potato chips. I like the unsalted ones.
Oh, me too. I like the salted ones, though.
The salted ones are whoo, whoo, whoo. But the unsalted ones, I can have a few and not feel like I'm, gonna lose it one way or the other. So I was having some kettle cooked chips, some kettle cooked chips with my Boca burger. And I accidentally bit in one sideways and it jammed my gum something crazy. You understand me? I mean, just bit right into it, total sideways, mashed right down on it. And I could almost instantly feel my gum swelling, like almost, it hurt really bad. And I could almost instantly feel this not about to be good. So then what I did was I went and rinsed my mouth and brushed my teeth. And then I went to the shelf and I pulled this. Oh, there you go. I pulled out the end of the concoction, which is garlic, oregano, and there was a rosemary plant in here that's now in my human self. Right. So, so I put that together. Let me be honest. I didn't put it together. My partner put it together. She's awesome. Danny did it for me, and she made it right in a drink like this. She added some lemons and some spring water to it, and it tasted like a lemonade. And I drank it and I swished my mouth with it. And I want to say maybe in about 15 minutes, it started feeling a little less tight in my mouth. I continued doing the same thing, just rinsing my mouth with the vinegar and, and then having the drink. And within about 4 hours, the swelling was going down. By the next morning, when I woke up, my mouth was back to normal.
Fantastic.
And this just happened. This was, this is a recent experience. So, and it depending on what I have going on, I say yet again, mostly for me at this point, it's more preventive. It's just something that I do because it's something that I do, not necessarily I'm in pain or this hurts. But the great thing about the book that I wrote was in the back of it, I put a full-on color-coded index that has all the different plants, all the different
wonderful
vegetables that you could possibly use.
So your book will, if somebody purchases this book, it talks about the ingredients. It also talks about how to make it.
Yes.
Many of nearly for me personally, all of the ingredients you have mentioned are things that I feel I can have access to, whether it be the honey or the vinegar or the garlic or the rosemary. Do you have a handful of favorite plants? So for me, for example, with garlic, I love garlic. When I was a kid, I would get a lot of middle ear infections, and I swim all the time. I'm in the water a lot, and so it's an old naturopathic trick, but to get an onion and put it there. But actually, what I use is I use a garlic clove, and I cut it so that it doesn't go in. But I cover it with olive oil, otherwise it can burn the skin. And it's amazing how effective that is for any time I start to develop a middle ear infection or get any kind of earache. What are some of your favorite plants, and how do you use them?
So, great question. I absolutely love the way you use nature to work with your human self. It's inspiring. And I grew up with this. So we could have this conversation all day. So my favorite plant is actually a rhizome. It's ginger. Ginger.
Oh,
yeah,
I love ginger.
Yeah, ginger. Ginger is, if someone said you can only pick one herb for the rest of your life, gun to your head, extreme scenario, I'm taking ginger with me everywhere. Every opportunity I have to shove ginger into my human self and anybody else around me, you're going to get it. Sit still long enough and I'm gonna feed you some ginger. Yeah, it's, to me, it was kind of one of those things, yet again, grandma wisdom. I want to say I was in my early 20s. I was working a corporate job, and I was having muscle spasms, really, really bad muscle spasms. This is still pre-diagnosis, so I did not know I had muscular dystrophy. I didn't understand what was going on. And there was this wonderful Caribbean lady who sat next to me. She worked with me. She was awesome. And she saw me struggling, and she brought me some ginger tea. And it was the very first time, meaning by ginger tea, meaning no tea bag at all, just the ginger roots steeped in water with some honey. That's it. She might have thrown some mint in there. I don't recall, but there was no tea bag to just to make the point. She brought me some ginger tea, and kid you not, within probably about 30, 45 minutes, the spasm had let up.
Oh, wow.
I'd never had that experience before with anything. Usually I had to get some Bengay, and, my family had been shoving bananas in me since I was a kid. And, and what people weren't understanding is that because of the muscular dystrophy that I have, I dump trace minerals, magnesium and potassium specifically. Yeah. Right. I literally dump them. So it doesn't matter how much I put in, my body doesn't know what to do with it. It doesn't metabolize it properly. And it just I excrete it. It comes right back out. So it's always been, this mad dash to try and get enough um, magnesium and potassium filled food products in me before there was an understanding that I wouldn't be able to orally consume as much as I will need because my body does not process it properly. So, it's been a learning, growing process, but ginger, I have gastroparesis as a result of having muscular dystrophy. So MD is the primary DX, but there are many, many other things that go along with it because it's just a progressive degenerative neuromuscular disorder. So it impacts everything that's covered in muscle, even soft muscle, right? So my digestive tract.
Sure. The smooth muscle in there. Yeah.
Exactly. My stomach is impacted. So,
oh, wow.
Exactly. My stomach does not process food properly. They did a gastric.
And ginger is fantastic for digestive issues. You mentioned ginger tea with a little honey, really good for sore throat. If you're in a pinch, you can just take a little chunk of that ginger root and just chew on it for a little bit. Ginger is phenomenal, and ginger is an envoy herb, and it's also a dispersive herb. So anything botanically that you take with ginger, it helps to disperse it. And if you and it's wonderful to cook with. You can it works with salty and sweet.
It does.
Beautiful.
It does.
One of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. I'm on a desert island. I get to bring one plant.
What are you bringing?
I'm bringing cannabis. I am. So there's a food element, there's a fiber element, there is a Lord have mercy, if I needed a recreational element to it. There's so many other aspects to it. What are your thoughts on cannabis as a botanical? I put you right on the spot here.
No, let's get into it. It's interesting because I grew up as a dare kid. I was a say no, like the say no to drugs campaign very literally worked on me. And it was just a lack of knowing. So I never had an experience that in my youth to try it. I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, none of those things. So when my muscular dystrophy became more progressive as I got older, and it was being treated with opiates and narcotics and benzos and things of that nature, and there kind of became this tipping point where I realized, one, my body, I can't sustain this in my human self, taking the level of pain meds that I'm receiving. I need to transition. So my transition came at the behest of my own doctors.
Your own MD medical doctor.
MD medical doctors in a place, in a space when it wasn't legal or medical,
oh, wow.
or recreational or anything else of that nature. And these had been my providers for almost a decade at this point, right? They were very involved in my treatment plan, and they were very involved personally. They, some of them were on the board of directors for my first nonprofit foundation.
Oh,
so
wow.
They were, yeah, exactly. There was a very close tie with some of these individuals, and they understood the human that I am, and they understood that there literally was just an ignorance that existed. So they kind of cut right through the noise and went right at me with what they know worked with me, which was straight up facts. And someone put in my hand the University of Mississippi's one of their early case studies, that just really kind of spelled
sure.
out.
And just for a little background for folks, University of Mississippi has, through, I believe it's DEA, always worked with cannabis. And they actually would dispense cannabis to a small number of patients as a federally legal program years before even California became legalized. Anyway, go ahead. Please continue.
Yeah. Yes. To that exact point. And it was me learning that, not in an urban legend scenario, but reading the actual real life pamphlet that came from the university, genuinely having the ability to understand, what is this plant? What does it do? What do we know? What are the questions that are remaining? What are the risks? I was able to learn all of those things. So my providers encouraged me, because the state I was in, it was not medical or recreational at the time. So they encouraged me to go to a program at UCLA. Out here, I'm in LA now. I've relocated, but at the time, I lived on the East Coast. I'm a Delaware native, so they sent me out here to UCLA, and I had a whole brand new awakening understanding of what is this plant, how can it be used medicinally, and is there efficacy here? Is this something I should consider in my treatment plan, or is this not the right thing for me? And having a conversation with providers at UCLA where they're speaking to me about specific strains, the same way my doctors at Hopkins and Penn and every other hospital on the East Coast had been speaking to me about narcotics and opiates. And, it was mind boggling to me to just be in what I know is an equivalent medical institution and get a totally different understanding of how to manage what I had going on in my human self. And the long story longer is I was at UCLA for about 2 weeks. When I arrived, I was bedridden. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't walk. I couldn't go to the bathroom by myself. Within about 2 weeks on that program, where they gave me 4 separate strains, they recommended 4 separate strains for me a day, a sativa, an indica, and 2 hybrids, morning, night, everything in the middle. Within 2 weeks, I was no longer bedridden. I was up. I was out of my wheelchair. I was taking myself to my own doctor's appointments. I was able to work out sometimes twice a day. My life changed. Real life changed my life. But it was the education. It was the actual scientific understanding of what this is and how does it do what it does. And once I knew that, there was no unknowing.
So, Lakia, this is an amazing story. In terms of your symptoms, is it the muscle spasms that bother you the most, or what are the symptoms that bother you the most? And how did the cannabis help with or address those major symptoms?
Great question. So yes, the muscle spasms are probably the worst of it. It's a constant, ongoing, never-ending process. My muscles want to draw up and become rigid, and I want them to stay relaxed and cool out. And the cooling out of it is where the cannabis comes immediately into play. So for me, the way this kind of worked was my treatment plan consisted of Valium, an IV Valium Q3 every 3 hours. I forget how many milligrams, something totally outlandish. So to get away from the Valium, I needed to find a plant to replace it. So the plant that I used to replace Valium specifically was Northern Lights.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Northern Lights became my Valium, right? It's, if I want to do this, then this will do that. And it worked in my, it worked for the muscle spasms. It helped get me to sleep. It helped keep my body and my muscles nice and relaxed and nice and leveled out, mellowed out. So that was for that. For my nausea and for my appetite, green crack was the thing that really helped. For ulcerative colitis that I deal with, a Boss Hog RSO is.
Sorry to interrupt you. I have had patients with amazing success with Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Now that's a hard one to treat. It's very hard to treat, first and foremost. But with RSO specifically, and RSO means Rick Simpson oil for those folks who may not be aware of that. And I just posted a study on my LinkedIn this week about cannabis, and I believe it was, it might have been Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. They're very similar. And it was an inhaled cannabis that helped the digestive tract. And my question was, what if they would have used an oral? It could have acted hypothetically as a topical effect. Anyway, I interrupted you there, but before I also forget is when I first learned about medical cannabis, I had been familiar with it on a recreational side, but I actually had 2 patients in a row, very back-to-back patients come in a row, and they both had taken themselves off of the exact same 2 different benzodiazepines, which is in the same family as Valium. And so the first one, I didn't even cause a blip because I said, how did you do that? And they said, marijuana. Okay, I don't have a problem. I'm not super judgmental. When I was in the clinical environment, I was not. But the second patient, I said, how did you do that? And they said, medical cannabis. They didn't use the marijuana word. And the difference in the word and the stigma that I had attached to it turned a light on in me, and that's when I started doing my research. This must have been in 2008, 2009. Anyway, I totally cut you off there, but Valium, that family, I think that cannabinoids have, or at least an option folks may want to consider with their doctors.
I
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, listen, Dr. Police, you're absolutely on point. I could not agree more. And to that point, right? So the way the way I wound up using the Boss Hog RSO, this is gonna be odd, and I apologize for my little bit of embarrassment on the front end. So I learned to turn it into a suppository.
Oh, that is totally, really legitimate and good. It's just we have a cultural thing around that. But go ahead and please continue.
Right?
It makes
So,
a whole lot of sense, actually.
and well, here's why. Because dealing with ulcerative colitis, I had providers who were really quick to want me to take steroid suppositories, and it didn't really set well with my spirit. I really had to give pause to that. I understood what they were going for, but in my mind, my first thought was, can we not try something a little less possibly demonstrative to my human self first? And if that doesn't work, then okay, let's maybe try something a little more aggressive. But that seemed very, I mean, to me, that's like, hey, you have an ant problem in your kitchen, bring in the TNT. Like, whoa, that's, so that was my response to my provider at the time. Well, one moment, doc, can we discuss, how about this? How about I try using a medical cannabis suppository? I will work with the pharmacist at my local dispensary to make sure I have a clear understanding, and then we'll consult back. And how about we meet back, and if I'm not doing better or there's not improvement, or then we'll look at other courses of action. I'm happy to review other things, but first, let's maybe try something that might do a little less long-term damage to my human self. And he wasn't crazy about the idea, but I'm real quick to fire providers if they're not in the right place and space with what my personal goals are. And their expertise is super, super appreciated, but also I spend a whole lot more time with me than they do. So, I think I have an idea of kind of at least what is going on within my human self. And I try and be kind of articulate, about that. So that's exactly what I did. I went to my local dispensary. I had a conversation with the pharmacist. I realized a lot of patients who go to medical dispensaries don't even know that there's a pharmacist on staff for a lot of them, most of them. But I did. So I went and talked to the pharmacist. He was awesome. And he pulled up some information and sent me a whole packet on how to make my own suppositories and
Oh, wow. That's great.
yeah, it was awesome. And I want to say within the first 24 hours, the pain and just tightness and swelling that I had been experiencing was easing up. And, within maybe 3 days, my symptoms had completely receded, versus when I had done steroid treatments in the past, it took 7 days before I had any relief at all. So it cut my, my recovery time in half, at least.
Wow. So let's talk, because I'm super interested in all the herbs, but I think a lot of my audience has a cannabis bent. You mentioned the suppositories. I think that those can be a very good option, but for a relatively smaller number of people. What other ways do you use cannabis, and how can we maybe give a little bit of an explanation for folks how you do it, and then they can always refer to your book for all of the specific details.
Absolutely. So before I got to the place and space where I was, just creating concoctions daily, random, whenever I could get my hands on new herbs, I was a pickleaholic.
Oh, you pickled a lot of things. Yeah.
I'll pickle
I
any.
love that. I lived in Japan. They pickle a lot of things in Japan, and one of my favorite types of pickles is called the takuan, and is named after an old Buddhist monk who is also a hero of mine in many other ways. Anyway, you can pickle so many things, you'd be surprised. Go ahead,
I
including
love, right?
plums for that matter.
Everything. I love every. If listen, if you sit still too long in my house, you might get pickled. I pickle everything. I love pickles. So I started with pickling, and yet again, grandma wisdom, your body's a temple, be careful what you put in it. So when I began consuming cannabis and introducing cannabis into my treatment plan and trying to figure out, I don't necessarily want to combust, or I don't want to combust, often or frequently. It does serve a particular purpose. And if that's your particular thing, that's great. But for me, right, I have asthma. I deal with respiratory concerns. I've been an expert speaker for the American Lung Association. So, for me, my consumption methods tend to be a bit different. And also, it's super important for me to be very, very clear and very lucid, meaning
Clear in your head.
very, very much so, right? So the buzzy, head high, psychoactive response, reaction, that type of thing is not necessarily what I'm going for. So what I use, what I learned, what I realized is using raw cannabis. So I'm pickling stuff, and then one day I legit just chucked a nug. I just chucked a nug in my pickles one day. No, like no joke. I just, with its herbs. Oh yeah, give me one. Bang, just threw it in there and just put the top on, stuck it in the fridge, and let's see what's gonna happen. Those are the best pickles of my life. They were awesome pickles, and there wasn't the psychoactive. There was no buzzy head. There was no different response. I could consume them in my food, and it gave me the amazing relaxation in my muscles. It
Oh, wow.
took away the pain and the aches in my joints without altering me in my mind. So
Fantastic.
that's
And with
how I got.
raw cannabis, for folks who don't know, raw cannabis contains THCA that has not been converted when it is heated, whether if you're smoking or inhaling, or if you bake brownies. That heating process changes it from a non-psychoactive molecule, THCA, to the psychoactive molecule, which we call THC, or delta 8 THC if you want to get more technical about it. So to make a pickle, take me through the process. I've got a mason jar, and I've got salt, right? That's the key ingredient. And we put in a layer of vegetables, this is, I'm imagining, put in a layer of vegetables or herbs, add salt, veggie salt, close it up tight,
I
put it
don't.
in a,
I don't actually. It's interesting you're saying that. I don't.
no, that's why I'm asking you.
Right. No, and I'm listening to you, and that's what I'm realizing is that there's right. So there's so many different ways to pickle. What you're referring to is what I believe is more like a salt cured pickle, like a brine.
Okay.
And that's absolutely one way to do it. I think I might be closer to fermentation than I am.
Oh, okay. Like
Right,
sauerkraut kind of thing.
exactly. So I am in my process. So empty mason jar, pickling spices, black pepper, whatever.
Oh,
And
love
then,
it. Okay.
right. And I love throwing some turmeric in, because the way you were referring to like the envoy. So, I know black pepper and turmeric, they love hanging out together. So I love putting
They
them
sure
together.
do. And
Yes.
turmeric, I'm just going to interrupt because these are important for folks to miss. Black pepper contains beta caryophyllene, which is a sesquiterpene that has its own medical benefits. And turmeric has well documented anti-inflammatory effects. And not the beta caryophyllene in the black pepper, but a different chemical called piperine enhances our body's absorption of turmeric. And the Ayurvedic folks in the subcontinent of India discovered this thousands of years ago. But black pepper and turmeric go well together, and they taste good together too.
Tastes amazing
Take
together.
it away, Lakia. So
Right. So
continue that process,
some
please.
black
Thank you.
pepper, right? Some turmeric, especially if I'm doing a bread and butter pickle, by the way. That makes for an amazing bread and butter pickle. But I use honey. So I make what would be almost equivalent of an oxymel to make my pickles, right? I don't use sugar and I don't use salt. I use vinegar, honey, herbs, spices, and then I'll cut down the cucumber and I add it to, twist the top on, shove it in the refrigerator, make sure there's some fresh dill in there. So that's, that's my pickling process. There's lots of different ways, if you want to add salt to it, you can. I deal with supraventricular tachycardia, which causes my blood pressure to, not necessarily be the best regulated. So I try and stay away from the heavy salts or anything that might be, just too high in sodium that might trigger.
Okay, so we were talking about your pickling process.
Right.
You were discussing how instead of salt, you're using honey and a little bit of vinegar, and you mentioned some of these other spices which sound delicious. And then we had some video trouble.
No.
What did I miss?
Well, so the long and short of it basically is, for me, pickling is a pretty simple process. Like I said, you can absolutely do the salt brine thing. That's something that I avoid, and the reason I avoid it is because I live with supraventricular tachycardia, SVT, so my heart goes too fast, just naturally, and as such, it impacts my blood pressure. So.
Mm-hmm.
I am constantly working to ensure that I'm doing things that are as low sodium as possible. Other people who aren't necessarily dealing with that same scenario may not be as conscious. So that's the reason I don't necessarily use salt in my pickles.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But that being said, adding the cannabis to it for me was me trying to figure out a way to strip down all of the terpenes, all of the trichomes from the plant matter without using a solvent, because I didn't want solvents inside my body if I could avoid it. Right?
Gotcha.
So this was the reason for the original idea to begin throwing cannabis inside my pickles. And once I started that process, right? Once I began that process, it was kind of game over for me.
Do you ever get it? It sounds like you're just using relatively small amounts of cannabis. One of the side effects for cannabis with not a lot of people, but a significant enough that you'll see it in the medical literature, is that THC does increase heart rate. So is that something that you experience, or do you feel maybe because while I'm thinking about it just now here off the top of my head, maybe because you're using a THCA as opposed to a Delta 9, that is not an effect that's happening, but I don't know. But I just want to get your experience as a patient with that who uses this a fairly regular amount of time.
Absolutely. So let me back up a little bit to answer your question. I'm actually using pretty large sums of cannabis in my process.
Okay.
If I'm making pickles, I can throw anywhere from maybe an eighth to a quarter of an ounce inside one jar of pickles. But it depends on what I'm trying to accomplish, right? I also add raw cannabis to my honey and grind it up, just break it down so it's got the plant matter right in there, and as much as
sounds like an old Egyptian technique.
Exactly right. As much as it's going to be decarboxylated is as much as the heated tea will decarboxylate it. That's it. So I put it in my honey. I add it to coconut oil that my partner makes my food with. We add it to our olive oil. There's a really good friend of mine sent me a kitchen rag, a kitchen towel that says there's weed in the food, because pretty much anyone who knows me personally knows well enough to not come into my house and just go into my refrigerator.
I had a problem one time with that with cookies. I have to tell you, it ended up being a pretty big problem.
Right. This is what we have signs. There are warning signs.
Hey, Jake, those are special cookies. You know that, Jake.
Exactly.
No, I didn't know.
We forewarn everyone. We want no accidents, right? But to that end, all of these are raw until they're introduced into the cooking process. And yet again, it really depends on kind of what my day is looking like, as to what that effect is. Now, to answer your question immediately and directly, as to the effects that it has when it's in the raw THCA form, no, it does not. It does not have that impact at all. No, sir. So
Great.
that's the getting
That's
around it.
it's super good feedback and a wonderful data point. So one of the things I think that I wish many of my conventional colleagues would understand about cannabis is how variable it is. I think a lot of them are starting to learn. And I'm just going to pause the video here because I think my bandwidth is going down. But so it's highly variable, and the day-to-day condition of the patient is also highly variable.
Mhm.
So, and that's exactly what you are describing, is that is you're not the same. Maybe even from hour to hour, it's different. So you are adjusting. Talk a little bit about and tell folks how you adjust from different points in your day, how that might affect how you're using the botanicals.
No, absolutely. That's a great question. And that's really a big part of my process. So, um, being able to understand dosage and titration, right? Like wrapping my brain around that came from my early experience with UCLA. It also came from a really good friend of mine, Rick Cusick, who was one of the early co-editors for High Times magazine. He did a great job of kind of putting me in touch with some really good resources that spoke to calculating dosage, calculating titration. So I had an idea, if I use a pound of butter and 8 ounces of flour, this is, and it goes in this size jar, what that dosage and titration is. So education, education, education. That's the most important part, in my opinion. That was the biggest thing I did, was learn those things. And they're
Amen.
right.
Amen.
And just being involved, right? And then the other part was journaling, writing down what I'm doing, what the experience is. There's no way I've at this point in my life consumed unquestionably thousands of strains of cannabis. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I know that because I journal. So I have a list that's exceptionally long. And what I did was I took the time. Every single time a new strain came into my presence, I would consume it by itself. Not with this, not with that, not mixed with this, not with alcohol. I don't drink, but not with anything else. Let me just figure out what this particular plant feels like in me. And I would write it down. So that's how I learned that Boss Hall RSO works perfectly for my ulcerative colitis. And if I need to repeat those results, I need the journal to go back to it so I know what I did.
Love that. I love that. That's and I this is how I think we empower ourselves as patients. And I had an experience. I'm not going to fill in the details, but I had an experience in 2003 where I was far from home. I was like 1,500 miles from home. And I had a fall from 8 to 10 feet onto concrete. And I spent a week in the hospital far from home. And it was hard for me to I was a new young doctor at the time, but it was still hard for me to advocate for myself. But in terms of empowering ourselves as patients, the more we can educate ourselves, the more we can be empowered in our own health care. And this isn't because we're better than the doctors, but even the more we can help the doctors help us.
That part.
Please so continue on with this variableness. You're keeping track, you're keeping journals. You are, when you're trying a new medicine for the first time, you're trying it all by itself so that you can see how it works. What are some of the mistakes you have made that maybe folks can learn from your mistakes?
Ooh, that's a great question. What do I want you guys never to have to experience? Mistake number one is if you have a provider, and this isn't even necessarily cannabis related, but this is just what I tell everybody from an advocacy perspective. You have a provider who's not listening to you, just not listening. They do not hear, whether it's your needs, whether it's your experiences, whether if your provider is being dismissive of your experience, your personal goals, or how you would prefer to manage your treatment plan, fire them. That's the biggest, probably most important thing that I've learned is you can curate your own medical team. You can be in control.
You're the general manager of your medical team.
Get involved.
Yeah.
Get involved. Now, that being said, do not do so in ignorance, right? Like education, education, education. Learn about your process. Understand, read your lab results. Read them. Listen, I'm going to tell you what, I have found out more information just reading the labs. There are things on there that a doctor will stand smack in front of you and never say out loud, even though they just looked at it on a sheet of paper. Read your stuff. Get involved in your process. From a cannabis perspective, I would say pitfall is not realizing or understanding the importance of learning the different strains, learning their terpene profiles, and using it to your benefit. Learn what you're consuming. Grandma wisdom. Know what you're putting inside yourself, baby. Right? Do not just consume anything. And as important as what the name of it is where it was grown and by whom it was grown. And that might be the biggest thing, right? Not knowing where my plants are coming from, not understanding what the grow process is, not reading those labs. Read your own labs and then read your cannabis labs.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic. Read your own labs, and you can show up at your doctor's office with a printed list of questions and give it to her or to him, and you will learn so much. And then you can track from 3 months ago my blood sugar was here, or my blood pressure was here, and now my blood sugar is here, or my A1C is here. And that's fantastic. I also very much appreciate the growers, because there are so many genius growers out there. And I'm a big proponent of home grows, because I know that with very little skill, I can grow C+ cannabis, maybe C+. First time I ever grew cannabis, and I don't use cannabis to get high. Let me be very clear about that. I used to, but I don't anymore. But when I did, I right at my accident, by the way, I was in a wheelchair for 4 months and I was housebound. So I grew 3 little plants, and they had purple flowers, which was my favorite. And when there was harvest time, I was so excited, and I tried it, and I literally, because it was right next to my bed, which I was for months and months, loved these plants hour by hour through the day. And when I tried this cannabis, it gave me one of the best effects ever. I was so excited to share it with my friends, and they were like, yeah. Anyway, but there are genius growers out there, and I believe that there is an element of intentionality that a great or a good grower can enhance with their plants. And one of the ways that I describe it, and then I'll turn the mic back over to you, is there are more types of cannabis than there are different kinds of dogs. And I love dogs, but I don't love all dogs. And if I get a dog, my next dog is not going to be a little tiny Chihuahua, and it's not going to be a big Great Dane. It's going to be a 30 to 40 pound dog, because that works best for my lifestyle. If the cannabis is not working for you, it could be because you got the wrong type of dog, or you get a dog from the shelter, and that's where I'll probably get my next dog is from the shelter, but you don't know what happened. So what were these plants sprayed on? Were they contaminated? Did they grow in bad soil? If you're in a legal market, we have some recourse, but not all of them are the same. Okay, so that's fantastic. And then before I turn it over, I would add, for me, from a clinician's perspective, the number one thing I am concerned about with cannabis for having a bad reaction for folks is getting too much THC. How can we not get too much THC? Because if you're a newbie and you get too much THC, chances are you are not going to like it at all. Anyway, back to you, Lakia. Thank you for listening.
I appreciate you. No, that was such great points, Doc. You're right. So I could not agree more. And I found that, like, I work with a lot of patients, a lot of providers like yourself, who have worked with me as a patient. They ask me that same question, like, how did you do that? Can you? And then the next when I tell them, then their next statement is, hey, can you talk to my other patients? So so I wound up having these conversations and working with a lot of patients, and trying to help them understand, it's not just about the number, right? The number of the potency of the THC, right? That's not nearly as important as what type of terpene profile this has in it. What are the cannabinoids? What are the flavonoids? Like, what are the compounds that are in this particular plant that might help your human body? And to that end, one of my favorite plants to consume probably hangs out around 20, low to mid 20s in percentage wise, but the terpene profile on that puppy right there, okay, it does all of the things in me. I would normally have to take 3 or 4 different flowers to put them together to get the profile that I can find in this one particular flower over here. But I know that because when I consume the flower, I wrote it down.
Yes, that's super important, because when I first started making, I love to make my own tinctures and I'll make my own topicals. And I can't even tell you, Lakia, how many times I've said to myself, oh, it's like waking up from a dream. I'll never forget this dream. I'll never forget what I put in this jar. Guess what? Guess what?
The next
You got to
morning.
write it down. You got to
The
write it
next
down.
morning. Right. So what I also learned is using chalk, not always a good idea. It was cute when it went on, but after about 3 grabs out of the fridge, the chalk's gone. So there's learning lessons. I honestly, I believe that, there's a joy and a pain of using cannabis as part of your medical treatment plan. And I think one of the most important, if not imperative, pieces and parts of that is, understand, one, is not for the weak of heart, in my humble opinion.
Talk more about that.
It's not for the weak of heart. Deciding to remove opiates and everything else, narcotics, benzos. I have zero pain medicine in my treatment plan at all, and have not for over a decade now. That being said, this morning I woke up and my stomach was just in actual real life knots, like totally twisted, inside out, upside down. I didn't think I was going to be able to get breakfast in me or anything else for that matter. And I was concerned that I might not be able to get through this interview. True story. What I did, and yet again, cannabis is not a cure-all. I have to employ a lot of other modalities into my treatment plan because this is the only thing I'm using. So I had to stop. I meditated. I use aromatherapy. I put some incense on. I use light therapy. So I'm very intentional. I'm very mindful about working to keep my human self as calm, as metered, as close to homeostasis as I can get myself. And after about maybe 15, 20 minutes of meditation, deep breathing, and some breath work at the end, my stomach calmed down. The pain went completely away. I was able to get a little bit of food in me, and then get myself ready, and I'm here and in good spirits. So as great as cannabis is, there is never a, it's going to take all the pain away. It's going to take all of, it's not going to take all of anything away, right? It's
Yeah, yeah.
miraculous in what it can
Oh,
do.
it can take a lot away that you don't want it to take away too.
Agree, agree,
It can,
absolutely.
and that happens with me when I use THC. It's different. Now, our endocannabinoid system, which is the system that it runs on, as we move through the years, it changes, which is one of the reasons why it's not great for our youth. And I'm talking about under the age of 25, the THC in the brain. And I started smoking weed when I was 13 years old, and I loved it, and I thought it gave me a spiritual outlook, and I thought I had clear insights that nobody else could possibly fathom, and that I really believed that. But as an adult running my own business, I found that it sapped my motivation. And now that doesn't happen for everybody. It does not. And then as our endocannabinoid system changes, it stopped being fun for me. But that's because I was using THC. I still use topicals. And if I flying makes me very nervous, I'll use CBD. And they're selling CBD in the airport now. CBD does not give you a head high. And I've seen a bunch of studies that say that it's also not habit forming. And so that's, I think, important. It can take away things you don't want it to, and no, it does not take away everything. But because it's a versatile plant, there's a type of a dog. Chow is one kind of a dog. You don't want a dog that I'm going to tell a joke that people who I love all dogs, but the joke is if a tree falls in the middle of a forest and nobody is around, does a Chihuahua bark? And if you want a dog that doesn't bark, get a Chow. If
Right.
you want a dog that fits in your purse that you can carry on the airplane and go, Chihuahua's great, or a mix is great. If you want a dog to pull a sled, you get a husky. You don't get a poodle, et cetera, et cetera. So you also mentioned aromatherapy and incense. Fragrance is one way to change our environment very quickly. Good aromas can change our environment. And light therapy. Light can change and shift our mood as well. So it sounds like you're doing a bunch of different things. What are some plants? I can tell you, for me personally, this is green tea I'm drinking here. It's again my cha. One of my favorite herbs to use along with cannabis, believe it or not, is green tea. If it is for a pain condition, caffeine enhances the pain relieving, just like black pepper enhances the effects of turmeric. Caffeine enhances the pain relieving aspects of cannabis. Do you have any plants or herbs that you like to blend with cannabis, and tell folks about, if so, how you do that?
I think one of the ones that I use it is probably a little semi-obvious, or at least to me it is, but I am a mango freak,
Oh, okay.
right? And I love putting mango with my cannabis. It is so fun. The myrcene in both of them kind of run away with one another. And it's just a really it just to me it just kind of enhances both of them. I enjoy the mango more when I'm consuming it with cannabis, and I enjoy the cannabis more when I'm consuming it with mango, if you will. So if there's what's my favorite plant, probably mango and mint.
Mints have salicylates too, which are aspirin-like molecules, and the cannabis plant, the THC in cannabis, does partially interact with NSAIDs, and the salicylates in mint have NSAID properties. You also mentioned, I believe, I know you mentioned black pepper with your pickling. That has fantastic aspects and is also can be very good for stomach discomfort, as is ginger. And I'm not sure, do you use clove in any of your?
Oh,
Okay, clove also high in beta caryophyllene, and the Ayurvedic the Ayurvedic, it's called bhang, Bhang, not like what you bubble out and smoke out of. Bhang is a traditional Ayurvedic that uses cannabis and other plants. And they will frequently, depends on where you go in India, but they will frequently also use mango, but they also use black pepper and clove, and also pine oriented scents. So it can be piney cannabis. You can smell it. It smells almost like a pine forest, but pine derivatives in an essential oil that you can then make your room smell like a pine forest can have some benefits as well. That's
Huge
awesome.
benefit. Oh man, I love pine. I love pining. The smell of pine just, oh, it, you know, it just I feel like it wakes me up. Like I feel like it opens my lungs. You know, it makes me want to breathe deeply. It's one I use in my room quite often,
Oh yeah.
in between my nebulizer treatments. You know, and it really does. When I find that I'm breathing a little shallow, I'll I'll add tea tree or a pine scent, and it's really great for that. I love how you speak to kind of all the aspects of what the different herbs and the fruits and vegetables, produce. I love how you speak to the scientific aspect of it. It really does mimic exactly the book that I wrote. I speak a lot about the vibrant palette of color on your plate. That's kind of my thing. And it's just trying to help people know and learn and understand how important it is to eat the whole rainbow on a daily basis, as many different color produce items,
And the
spices.
food looks better. So when it's on your plate, how fantastic it is to have all of the different colors. It's and man, it's probably been 20 years since I read this study, but having 5 different colors of food, greens are easy, reds, yellows, oranges, purples, whether it be from there are edible flowers that you can throw in. I'm a big fan of, like, if the broccoli has gotten there's so much broccoli and those yellow flowers they look and taste great in a salad. Absolutely. Um, I, do you have any questions for me that you would think you've been wondering or curious about? I always like to, as we're nearing the end of our conversation, ask, do you have any questions for me about anything botanical or plant related?
I guess my question for you, and something, I'm always dealing in plants and herbs. And I'm always trying to learn, a new or interesting herb or application for an herb. And every now and again I'll come across one that just absolutely baffles me. Like there's a plant I came across called a ghost. What was it? So is it a ghost plant? I don't recall, but it had this really weird, like, ethereal definition to it. So my question to you is, what is the weirdest, wildest, most out there herb or plant or spice that you have encountered, that you would have never been able to dream up in your wildest?
Okay, because you used the word dream, that's how I know I should answer it this way. So there's and a lot of people have heard of this. It's called ayahuasca. I'm sure you probably heard of it.
But I'm
Uh,
not familiar. So
oh, ayahuasca is a hallucinogen. It comes from the jungles of Central and South America. It's a brew that local people would use ceremonially as a group, and it has a psychoactive chemical in it called dimethyltryptamine. And this is not why I'm talking about it, but psychedelics have they're good for the Google juice on Microsoft platforms, and they're bad for the Google doesn't like Google doesn't like it, but Microsoft does when you talk about psychedelics. But it's a psychedelic. But the reason I'm talking about it is not because it's a psychedelic. I think there are good end of life approaches to psychedelics with a psychedelic assisted care. And I also think they can be good for addictions. And at the end of life, giving insight into what is the meaning of my life is one of the areas. But there's a molecule in this brew called DMT, dimethyltryptamine. And it is, our brain makes a similar chemical. We have receptors for it, and it's part of the otherworldliness effect that it happens. Now, ayahuasca is a combination of two plants. One plant contains the DMT, which is the one that gives you a head high, but the other plant, so one kind of comes from the ground, and the other one is from a vine that grows up in the trees in completely different areas of the forest. And the DMT, if we just take the one plant, it goes into our digestive system, and there's an enzyme called monoamine oxidase that breaks the DMT down, and you don't get a spiritual or psychedelic experience at all. But this other plant that grows far away, these indigenous local peoples without any knowledge of plant chemistry intuited to combine these two plants together, but before you combine them, to go through this cooking process of the other plant before you combine them together. And that other plant provides an MAO inhibitor that stops our stomach from breaking down the DMT. So if you use the DMT without this other plant, it goes through the digestive system or breaks down and nothing happens. But this other plant from so far away, how did they intuit it? And if you ask many of the shamans, if you look into the anthropologic research, they say, oh, we dreamt it. It came from dreams. So I find that it is very, very, how did this indigenous technology intuit that chemical process? That's one. And I guess if you have time, in every culture where cannabis has grown, the Egyptian culture, the ancient Hebrews, the ancient Greeks, the Persians, in the Indian subcontinent, and through China, all of those cultures have a word for cannabis, and they use it for pain control, muscle spasticity. So it makes a whole lot of sense to us how they might have tried it and it worked, and will continue to use it, and it became a part of traditional folk use of plants. But there is a family of plants that is called the Artemisian family. Wormwood is an example of Artemisian. Every culture, wherever Artemisias are grown, use it for divination purposes and to keep away bad luck and bad spirits. So how in the world so you asked for something dreamlike. This is my answer. How in the world do people from all different places use this same family of botanicals to keep away something that our culture doesn't even believe in? I'm not saying that it's true and that I believe that it happens, but I find it astounding. And it speaks to me of that there's so much traditional, we talk about grandmother medicine, there is so much traditional wisdom that we as humans have had access to for and how to use these plants. And part of that is us speaking to that here today. What did you think? Tell me what you thought about that.
Oh my goodness, spectacular. I could not agree more. And I've always found it quite fascinating as well. In current day, it doesn't see, it seems like, oh yes, this makes sense, because the world is a much smaller place, right? We have the ability to see and know what is actually real life happening all the way across the world, observers' view. But 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, there was none of that. 7,000 years ago, there is evidence of this process being used all around the world with humans who had no ability to connect with one another. There's no way you could have known over here in Timbuktu what was happening over here in St. Louis. You couldn't have known those things. But as you say, the writings in those times match. It's all the same. People were using it for the same thing. And I'm grateful, I'm thankful, I'm appreciative that I have the team around me that I have. I have some wonderful human beings around me who have over the years kind of been with me and helped me through this process and, really, really assisted me because I came from a very, no pun intended, green place within myself as an adult. The very first time I went into a dispensary, I was in actual tears because I did not know what to ask for. And then when the people behind the counter tried to help me, I also didn't know then what's the method to get it from this plant that I've never seen before in my life except for on TV. How do I get this into myself? How does that work? I knew none of those things. And I actually had to go back out to my car and get my intern, who I love him dearly. He was such a godsend in that moment. But it was his youthfulness and his relationship with that plant that allowed him to, and of course these people who are like, man, this lady's bugging out. Let's help her, right? So yes, go get your guy, and he came in and he helped me understand, this is what I need, and then he took me across the street to the smoke shop because I didn't know there was another trip that should have been involved. So I've grown so much in this process. I started out green. If you're a patient and you are trying to learn how to get your arms around your treatment plan, if you're trying to learn how to remove opiates or narcotics or benzos from your treatment plan and you're frustrated and you're not really sure what to do, just keep going. I think the best thing I could have done for myself was not quit on myself too soon.
Oh, great. It's so easy. It's so easy to give up when you're not feeling good and you're not. One of my pieces of advice is depending on your insurance plan, some people can do this more easily than others, but if you do not like, and you mentioned this in a different way, but if you do not like what your doctor is telling you, and you by all means possible, get a second opinion. And those opinions should make you feel better. If the second opinion makes you feel more confused, get a third opinion.
Thank you.
If Lord willing, your insurance and if you are having a relatively rare or serious condition, you've been moved up the specialist ladder, they're usually happy to refer around that way. And if 3 doctors are confusing you, maybe the problem is that this is a challenging condition, and do not give up. And that's, I think, exactly what your story is.
Absolutely. And you're saying exactly what I was saying. The second opinion, right? It's understand what you need to understand. And I think if you get to the third, and I did, I mean, that was a situation where I had maybe 7, 8, or 9. And in the end, what I realized and what I had to understand was I needed case management, like you said, because some cases are complex. So I needed someone to kind of hop in there with me and help me understand, okay, well, what is really going to be right and what's going to be the most beneficial. So no, you're not looking for someone who's going to necessarily mimic your ideas or your understandings. You want to heal. But, working on something like what I'm working on, like a patient portal app, it gives people the ability to be a patient and get in the middle of a conversation with a real life provider. You can talk to these providers. What I realized is when you talk to them, you gain a different understanding of how you can help them help you. And
that's exactly right.
That's what it is.
And that's why your education is important, because it is ultimately about helping you. But one of the ways that you can help yourself is to help your providers, and not everybody is an A+ patient. Most doctors and I am not an A+ patient. I'm like a C+ patient, but we can all do better. I definitely read my labs, but you know what? I have high blood pressure. And when I get stressed, I reach for those kettle chips, and I'm not, I know, with that popcorn, so I know that that's not great. But anyway, um, I have so much enjoyed this conversation. I cannot wait to release it. Before I go, I'm going to give you a chance to tell people how to find your book and find you. But do you have any last comments, thoughts, or questions for me?
I do not. Yet again, just thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Please know that all of the work you're putting into your process, it makes a difference. It really does. It absolutely is that positive impact. It allows for myself, for other patients, and for providers to really have the ability, I think, to kind of wrap their mind around the science of this plant. And I think that's going to be a huge part of how we get away from that stigma that currently exists. It impacts a lot of people. It impacts the whole industry, actually. So I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here, the opportunity to speak with you. And I think, if anything, my favorite thing to say is your attitude dictates your outcome, right? So I do my best to make every day the best day I can.
Thank you, Lakia. Where can people find your book? How can they find your book?
Concoctions is everywhere your books are. So we're on Amazon. It is on Barnes and Noble. You can go to standforsomethingmedia.com, STAND, the number 4, somethingmedia.com. Or you can hop right on any of my socials. I'm at ILLZ_OG. Feel free to grab me everywhere there's socials.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm Dr. Jake Felice. You can find me at sweetwaterholistic.com and also on Instagram. And I'm going to say I'm truly grateful